On what seemed like an ordinary college night, intimidation was the plan, until it collided with the wrong woman. The notorious Hollow Reapers biker gang thought they'd found an easy target in a quiet student. But Dorian Highfield wasn't just any student. A former Marine and karate black belt, she had faced enemies far more dangerous than a gang of bullies on motorcycles. They counted on her fear. What they didn't count on was her training, her discipline, and the kind of courage forged in combat. What began as a threat turned into a standoff they'll never forget. This is the story of how one woman turned fear into firepower and walked away without ever raising her voice. Welcome to Veteran Biker, where we bring you real stories of strength, resilience, and the kind of silent justice that only warriors understand. Have you ever been pushed to the edge and found a part of yourself you didn't know existed? Tell us your story in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. We're building a global brotherhood of strength. If this story speaks to you, make sure to like the video, subscribe to Veteran Biker, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter in the fight for dignity and respect. And don't miss tomorrow's video. The sharp, rhythmic sound of fists meeting the heavy bag echoed through the dimly lit karate gym. Dorian Highfield's movements were precise, calculated, and unwavering. She moved like a coiled spring, unleashing controlled bursts of energy with each strike. Her dark brown hair was tied back into a tight ponytail, beads of sweat glistening on her forehead. This was her sanctuary, a place where the noise of the outside world faded and the weight of her past found an outlet. She paused, breathing heavily, and adjusted her stance. In the mirror, her reflection stared back, eyes hardened by years of discipline and experience. The faint scars on her knuckles and a barely noticeable one just above her brow were reminders of a life she no longer talked about. The Marine Corps had forged her into the person she was today. Though the regimented military lifestyle was behind her, the memories of long nights and harsh terrains in distant lands were never far from her mind. As she executed a perfect spinning kick, her mind betrayed her with an unwelcome flashback. She was back in the desert, her squad pinned down under heavy fire. The roar of gunfire and the acrid smell of smoke filled her senses. The mission had gone south quickly, and she remembered the sinking realization that not everyone would make it out alive. Dorian shook her head sharply, pulling herself back to the present. She focused on the bag in front of her and unleashed a flurry of punches, as if trying to pummel the memories into submission. The gym door creaked open, breaking her concentration. A hesitant figure stepped inside, her presence almost swallowed by the room's expansive shadows. It was Astria Windvale, one of the students from campus. She looked timid, her large eyes darting nervously as if she expected to be rebuked for intruding. Dorian lowered her fists and wiped the sweat from her brow with a towel. "Hey, Astria," Dorian greeted, her tone steady and calm. "What brings you here?" Astria hesitated, shifting from one foot to the other. She clutched her bag tightly, her knuckles pale. I need your help," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Dorian raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for Astria to continue. The young woman took a shaky breath and said, "It's the bikers, the ones hanging around the parking lot. They've been harassing me and some other students." Dorian frowned, her mind immediately alert. The group Astria referred to was known as the Hollow Reapers, a notorious biker gang that had recently started showing up around campus. They were loud, brash, and loved asserting dominance through intimidation. The campus security had done little to address their presence, and most students were too afraid to confront them. "What exactly have they been doing?" Dorian asked, her voice calm but edged with concern. Astria looked down at her feet, her shoulders hunched. "They block my path when I'm walking home. They say things, horrible things, and sometimes they grab my bag or push me. It's getting worse." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she looked up at Dorian, her eyes pleading. I didn't know who else to ask. Dorian's jaw tightened. Bullying was something she'd seen far too often, both in and out of uniform. Her first instinct was to march straight to the bikers and put an end to it, but she knew better than to escalate the situation without a plan. I'll help, Dorian said, her voice firm and resolute. But you need to report this to campus security first. Astria shook her head vehemently. They won't do anything. Everyone knows that. Please, Dorian, you're the only one who can stand up to them. Dorian sighed. She could see the desperation in Astria's eyes, the silent plea of someone who had endured enough. All right, she said after a pause. I'll take a look at the situation, but no promises, okay? Astria nodded quickly, relief washing over her face. Thank you, she whispered. As Astria left, Dorian grabbed her water bottle and took a long sip, her mind already working through the possibilities. She had hoped her skills as a Marine would only ever be a part of her past. But life had a way of drawing her back into situations where they were needed most. She grabbed her jacket, her muscles still tense from the workout, and prepared to leave the gym. Something told her this would be far from a routine encounter. As Dorian stepped out of the gym into the cool evening air, the faint rumble of motorcycles echoed in the distance. She had heard about the Hollow Reapers, but had yet to encounter them directly. From what she gathered, they thrived on fear and chaos, targeting anyone they perceived as weak or vulnerable. Dorian wasn't in the mood to deal with their kind, but Astria's trembling voice lingered in her mind. She adjusted her jacket and made her way to the campus parking lot, her steps deliberate yet unhurried. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows over the rows of cars. It was quiet, save for the occasional sound of distant laughter and engines revving. As she turned a corner, the quiet shattered. A group of 5 bikers loomed near the edge of the lot, their motorcycles gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Leather jackets adorned with dark, aggressive designs marked them unmistakably as the Hollow Reapers. At their center stood Victor Hollow, his towering frame and tattoo-covered arms radiating an aura of menace. His sneer widened as his gaze locked onto Dorian, who continued walking toward her car, seemingly unbothered. "Hey there, sweetheart!" Victor called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "Lost? This ain't a place for little college girls." Dorian stopped, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. She sized up the group quickly, noting the swagger in their steps and the way their hands rested just a little too casually on their belts or chains. The others laughed at Victor's comment, their voices a harsh, grating chorus in the otherwise still night. "No," Dorian replied evenly. "I'm just heading to my car." Victor took a step closer, invading her space with a calculated smirk. "Your car, huh? Maybe we should take a look at it, make sure it's safe." Another round of laughter erupted from the group, but Dorian didn't flinch. Her stance was steady, her eyes calm yet alert. She could feel the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins, a familiar sensation from years of training and combat. "I don't think that'll be necessary," she said, her voice low but firm. The smirk on Victor's face deepened, his eyes narrowing as he tried to gauge her. "You've got some guts, I'll give you that. But you're a long way from home, girl, and here we make the rules." Dorian didn't respond immediately. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly, her posture unyielding. She had no intention of provoking them, but she wasn't about to show weakness either. The bikers began to close in, their movements slow and deliberate, like predators circling prey. "Let me give you a piece of advice," Victor continued, his tone laced with condescension. "You don't belong here, so why don't you just scurry off and save yourself the trouble?" "Thanks for the advice," Dorian replied coolly, "but I'll be fine." Victor's amusement turned to irritation. He reached for a chain hanging loosely from his belt, letting it clink ominously as he wrapped it around his hand. "You've got a smart mouth. Let's see if you're as tough as you act." The air grew thick with tension. Dorian's muscles tensed, every fibre of her being ready for what might come next. She could hear the faint sound of footsteps nearby, someone watching from the shadows, likely too scared to intervene. Victor raised the chain slightly, but before he could make a move, Dorian spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Before you do something you'll regret, you should know." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her college ID, flipping it to show the small line of text that read "Former Marine." "I'm not just another college student." The laughter died instantly. The other bikers exchanged uncertain glances, their bravado faltering as they processed her words. Victor hesitated, his hand tightening on the chain, but his eyes betraying a flicker of doubt. "You're bluffing," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Dorian stepped closer, her gaze steady. "Try me." For a moment no one moved. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of engines in the background. Then, as if sensing the shift in power, Victor let out a frustrated grunt and lowered the chain. "Let's go!" he barked at his crew, turning sharply toward his bike. Dorian didn't move as they retreated, their bravado replaced with sullen murmurs. She stood still, watching them disappear into the night, her heart still pounding. It wasn't over. She knew that much. But for now, the parking lot was quiet again. The next morning, the campus was buzzing. Students gathered in small groups, their voices hushed but animated as they scrolled through their phones. Screens flashed with the grainy late-night video of Dorian facing off against the Hollow Reapers in the parking lot. Keir Lowen had caught the entire scene on his phone and, in a moment of impulsiveness, uploaded it to social media with the caption, "Marine versus the Reapers, Parking Lot Showdown." The video had spread like wildfire. Comments flooded in from both students and outsiders, ranging from admiration to disbelief. "She didn't even flinch," one comment read. Another said, "Who knew we had a Marine on campus? Total badass." But not all were positive. Some questioned the legitimacy of her claim, and others mocked the bikers for backing down. The Reapers got punked by a girl? Pathetic. Dorian sat in a corner of the campus library, her laptop open but forgotten as she stared at the screen. She hadn't been online much since the encounter, but the steady stream of notifications on her phone had forced her to take a look. Her jaw tightened as she scrolled through the video and the accompanying comments. She had worked hard to leave her military past behind, to blend in as just another student. Now, thanks to Keir, her anonymity was shattered. Across campus, Keir Lowen was reveling in the attention. He stood near the student union, surrounded by a small group of friends who were eagerly watching the view count on his video climb. "Dude, you've gone viral!" one of them exclaimed, clapping him on the back. Keir grinned, enjoying the spotlight. "Yeah, I mean, it was insane," Keir said, recounting the event for what felt like the 100th time. She just stood there, calm as anything, and the Reapers were all like, "Oh no, let's get out of here." He mimicked a cowardly retreat, earning laughter from the group. But not everyone was laughing. Astria Windvale stood at a distance, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She had seen the video too and felt a pang of guilt. It was because of her that Dorian had been drawn into this mess. Astria hadn't asked for the video to be made public, and now it seemed like the entire campus knew. Worse, she feared what the Hollow Reapers would do next. Her fears were well-founded. At a local diner on the outskirts of town, Victor Hollow and his crew sat around a table, their expressions grim. A phone rested in the center, playing the now viral video on repeat. The sound of their laughter from the night before had been replaced by silence, broken only by the occasional scrape of a fork or the hiss of a coffee machine. "This is bad, Vic," Malin Dracott, one of the bikers, said, his voice low. "Real bad. People are talking like we're a joke now." Victor's fist slammed onto the table, causing the utensils to rattle. "I don't care what people are saying," he snapped, his face red with anger. "That woman's the problem. She humiliated us. She didn't even touch us," another biker muttered, earning a glare from Victor. "That's not the point," Victor growled. "She made us look weak. And now, thanks to that little punk with the phone, the whole world knows about it." Malin leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "So, what are we going to do about it?" Victor's lips curled into a sneer. "We're going to remind everyone who runs this place, and we're starting with her." Back on campus, Dorian was trying to regain a sense of normalcy. She headed to her psychology class, hoping to bury herself in her studies and avoid any further attention. But as she walked through the crowded hallway, she couldn't escape the stares and whispers. "Is that her?" "Yeah, that's Dorian, the Marine. She doesn't look like much." "Are you kidding? Did you see the video? She's scary." Dorian kept her head down, her expression unreadable. Years of military training had taught her how to tune out distractions, but this was different. This wasn't an enemy she could face head-on. It was a tide of curiosity and judgment that followed her everywhere. After class, she found herself cornered by Keir Lowen. He approached her with a wide grin, his phone still in hand. "Hey, Dorian," he called out. "You're famous. Did you see the video? People are going crazy over it." Dorian stopped and fixed him with a hard stare. "I saw it," she said, her tone clipped. Keir, either oblivious or undeterred, continued, "I mean, come on, it's awesome. You showed those guys what's what. Everyone's talking about how badass you are." "I didn't ask for this," Dorian said firmly. "Take it down." Keir blinked, his grin faltering. "What? Why? This is good for you. People are loving it. I don't care what people think," Dorian shot back. "That video is going to cause more problems than you realize." Before Keir could respond, Astria appeared at Dorian's side, her face pale. "Dorian," she said urgently, tugging on her sleeve. "It's them. They're here." Dorian's stomach dropped as she turned to see the Hollow Reapers entering the campus gates, their bikes rumbling like thunder. The tension in the air was palpable, a storm brewing that no one could ignore. The low growl of motorcycle engines sent a ripple through the campus. Students who had been chatting or lounging on the grass immediately turned their heads toward the sound, their conversations fading into tense murmurs. The Hollow Reapers were back, and they didn't look like they were here to make amends. Victor Hollow led the group, his expression carved from stone as he dismounted his bike. Behind him, Malin Draycott and the other bikers followed suit, their movements deliberate and intimidating. The Reapers exuded menace, and their very presence made students scramble to clear the courtyard. From her vantage point near the library steps, Dorian Highfield watched them arrive. She had anticipated something like this. Victor Hollow didn't strike her as the type to let things go. What she hadn't expected was their boldness, showing up in broad daylight on campus. It was a calculated move meant to send a message, and Dorian didn't doubt that she was the intended recipient. "Dorian," Astria whispered urgently, clutching her arm. "We should go. They're looking for you." Dorian shook her head, her gaze fixed on Victor as he surveyed the crowd like a predator. "Running isn't going to solve anything," she said, her voice calm but resolute. She stepped forward, placing herself in clear view of the bikers. Victor's eyes locked onto hers immediately. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face as he approached, his boots crunching against the gravel. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "if it isn't the campus hero." Dorian didn't respond, her stance steady and unflinching. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, students watching anxiously from a safe distance. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she registered the faint glow of a phone screen. Someone was recording this too. "You embarrassed me last night," Victor continued, his tone low but dripping with venom. "Made me and my crew look weak. I don't take kindly to that." That's your problem, not mine, Dorian replied, her voice even. You came looking for trouble, and you found it. Maybe next time you'll think twice. Victor's smile twisted into a snarl. You think you're tough, don't you? Because you're some ex-Marine? That doesn't mean anything here. This is my turf. Dorian tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but her muscles taut. You don't want to do this, Victor, she said, her voice edged with warning. Walk away. But Victor wasn't listening. He gestured to one of the bikers behind him, a burly man with a shaved head and a scowl permanently etched onto his face. Gideon, Victor barked. Teach her some respect. The man stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. The gathered crowd let out a collective gasp, and Astria grabbed Dorian's arm again. Dorian, please, she pleaded. They're serious. So am I. Dorian said quietly, brushing Astria's hand aside. She took a step toward Gideon, her eyes never leaving his. If he wants to make a mistake, I won't stop him. Gideon hesitated for a fraction of a second, thrown off by her unwavering confidence, but the hesitation passed, and he lunged at her with a heavy swing. Dorian moved like a shadow, sidestepping the attack with fluid precision. In a single controlled motion, she grabbed his arm, twisted it behind his back, and swept his legs out from under him. Gideon hit the ground with a thud, his breath knocked out of him. The courtyard fell silent, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. Dorian released Gideon and stepped back, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. That was your warning, she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority. Don't make me repeat myself. Victor's face darkened, his hands clenching into fists. You're going to regret this, he spat. You think you're untouchable, but we'll see how tough you are when you're all alone. Before Dorian could respond, the roar of sirens cut through the air. A campus security car pulled up, and Gideon Ashvale, the officer on duty, stepped out, his expression stern. What's going on here? Gideon demanded, his gaze sweeping over the scene. His eyes landed on Dorian and then shifted to the bikers. You all know there's no loitering on campus. Get out of here before I call the police. Victor glared at Dorian one last time before jerking his head toward his crew. Let's go, he muttered. The Hollow Reapers mounted their bikes, their engines roaring as they sped off the campus grounds. As the crowd began to disperse, Officer Ashvale approached Dorian. I don't know what's going on between you and those guys, he said, his tone measured. But whatever it is, it ends here. Do you understand? Dorian nodded, though she doubted Victor would let things end so easily. She glanced at Astria, who was still trembling beside her. It's going to be okay, Dorian said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll handle this. But as she walked away, her mind raced. She knew Victor's parting words weren't an idle threat. The Hollow Reapers weren't finished with her yet, and she needed to be ready for whatever came next. The Hollow Reapers sped down the winding road that led out of the campus, their engines roaring like distant thunder. Victor Hollow gripped the handlebars of his motorcycle tightly, his knuckles white with rage. The humiliation of being forced to retreat twice now gnawed at him, fueling his desire for retribution. He replayed the scene in his head. Dorian's calm, unflinching demeanor, the way she had effortlessly taken down Gideon. It wasn't just the physical defeat that stung, it was the look in her eyes, the quiet confidence that told him she wasn't afraid of him. That was something Victor couldn't tolerate. As they reached the outskirts of town, the group veered into a dusty lot behind an abandoned gas station. It was their unofficial meeting spot, a place where no one would bother them. Victor killed the engine and dismounted, pacing furiously as the others gathered around. Malin Dracott leaned against his bike, watching Victor with a mix of curiosity and unease. The rest of the crew lingered nearby, their usual bravado tempered by the memory of their recent encounter. "We can't let her get away with this," Victor snarled, his voice cutting through the silence. "That little Marine thinks she can make fools of us? We'll show her what happens when you mess with the Hollow Reapers." Malin frowned, his arms crossed. Vic, she's not like the others we've dealt with. She's trained. You saw what she did to Gideon." Victor rounded on him, his eyes blazing. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't know what we're up against?" He jabbed a finger in Malin's direction. "That's why we need to be smart about this. No more public confrontations. We hit her where it hurts." "And where's that?" Malin asked, his tone skeptical. "She doesn't seem like the kind of person you can scare with the usual tricks." Victor's lips curled into a malicious grin. "Everyone has a weakness. If we can't break her directly, we'll go after the people she cares about, starting with that little friend of hers, the one who was clinging to her like a scared rabbit. Windvale?" Gideon asked, still rubbing his shoulder from where he had hit the ground earlier. "She's nothing, barely worth our time. She's leverage," Victor snapped. "We make an example of her, and Dorian will have no choice but to back down." The others exchanged uneasy glances. This was a dangerous escalation, even by their standards, but Victor's authority was absolute. No one dared to openly challenge him. On campus, Astria Windvale was doing her best to focus on her classes, but the events of the past few days had left her shaken. Everywhere she went, it felt like eyes were on her, judging or pitying her for being caught up in the Reaper's drama. The video of Dorian's confrontation with the bikers had only made things worse, drawing unwanted attention to everyone involved. Astria couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced over her shoulder as she walked across the quad, her heart skipping a beat when she saw a group of unfamiliar men standing near the fountain. They weren't wearing the typical leather jackets of the Hollow Reapers, but something about their posture and the way they looked at her set off alarms in her head. She quickened her pace, clutching her books tightly to her chest. When she reached the safety of the library, she found Dorian sitting at a table near the back, surrounded by textbooks and notebooks. Dorian looked up as Astria approached, her expression softening slightly. "Hey," Dorian said, "you okay?" Astria shook her head, her voice trembling. "I think they're watching me. Not Victor or the others, but someone. I don't feel safe." Dorian's jaw tightened and she closed her notebook. "Sit down," she said firmly. "Tell me everything." As Astria recounted what she had seen, Dorian's mind worked quickly, piecing together the implications. The Reapers were escalating, and if they were targeting Astria, it meant they were running out of options to get to her. That made them even more dangerous. "We need to report this," Dorian said. "The campus security might be useless, but the police can at least document what's happening." Astria hesitated, her hands fidgeting nervously. "What if it makes things worse? What if they come after me even harder?" "They're already coming after you," Dorian pointed out. "We can't let them think they can get away with this. Trust me, Astria. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Astria nodded reluctantly, her trust in Dorian outweighing her fear. Together, they headed to the campus security office, where Officer Gideon Ashvale was reviewing reports. He looked up as they entered, his expression a mix of surprise and irritation. "You again," Gideon said, leaning back in his chair. "What now?" Dorian explained the situation succinctly, her tone measured but firm. Gideon listened, his frown deepening with each word. When she finished, he sighed and rubbed his temples. "Look, I get it," Gideon said. "These guys are trouble, but unless they actually do something we can prove, there's not much I can do. My hands are tied." "That's not good enough," Dorian said sharply. "You know who they are. You know what they're capable of. Are you really going to wait until someone gets hurt before you take action?" Gideon met her gaze, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to back down. "I'll file the report," he said finally. "That's all I can promise." As they left the office, Astria looked up at Dorian with wide, uncertain eyes. "Do you think it'll help?" Dorian didn't answer right away. She had seen too many situations like this where bureaucracy and red tape left people vulnerable, but she couldn't let Astria lose hope. "It's a start," she said, "but we're not going to rely on them. I'll come up with a plan." That evening, as the campus grew quieter, Dorian found herself walking the perimeter of the dormitories, her senses on high alert. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Her instincts were rarely wrong. Sure enough, as she rounded a corner, she spotted a figure lingering near the dormitory entrance. It was Malin Draycott. He didn't see her at first, his attention focused on his phone, but when he looked up, his eyes widened slightly in recognition. Dorian stepped forward, her voice steady and commanding. "What are you doing here, Draycott?" Malin smirked, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Just taking a walk." "Nice night, isn't it? You've got 5 seconds to get out of here before I make you regret it," Dorian said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. Malin hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, I'm going. No need to get all marine on me." As he walked away, Dorian's eyes followed him until he disappeared into the shadows. She didn't believe for a second that he was acting alone. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As night descended over the campus, the usually bustling pathways fell silent. A cool breeze rustled the trees, and the faint glow of streetlights cast long, wavering shadows across the empty courtyards. Dorian Highfield sat in her dorm room, the faint hum of her desk lamp illuminating a stack of open notebooks and her phone, which buzzed intermittently with messages from Astria. Astria's latest text read, "I think they're still watching. I saw someone near the library earlier. Be careful." Dorian typed a quick response to reassure her, "Stay inside, lock your doors, I'll handle it." But Dorian knew this wasn't a situation that could be handled easily. Victor Hollow wasn't the kind of person to let go of a grudge, and his return to campus earlier had made one thing clear: he was escalating. She needed to think ahead, anticipate his moves, and ensure that Astria and anyone else caught in the crossfire stayed safe. Her mind flicked back to Malin Draycott's presence near the dormitories earlier that evening. It hadn't been a coincidence. They were testing boundaries, scouting the area, maybe even looking for weaknesses. Dorian leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping a steady rhythm on the desk. She had dealt with threats like this before, but this wasn't a battlefield where rules were clear and allies were guaranteed. Here she was on her own. She opened her laptop and began researching the Hollow Reapers. A few clicks brought up articles about minor run-ins with the law, accusations of intimidation, and an arrest or two for vandalism. Nothing major, nothing that had stuck. Victor Hollow was careful, and that made him dangerous. The internet offered little in terms of actionable intel, but it did confirm her suspicion. The Reapers thrived on fear. They used it to control people, to silence them, to create an aura of invincibility. If that aura cracked, they'd lose their power. Across town, Victor sat in a dimly lit garage surrounded by his crew. The air was thick with the smell of oil and gasoline, the occasional hiss of a welding torch punctuating the tense atmosphere. On the workbench beside him lay a map of the campus, marked with red circles around key locations, the dormitories, the library, and the student union. "We hit her tomorrow," Victor said, his voice low but firm. "We make it clear that this is our territory. No one humiliates the Hollow Reapers and gets away with it." Malin raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly are we doing that? She's not exactly easy to scare." Victor leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a cold intensity. "We don't go after her directly. We hit the people around her. That Windvale girl, for starters. She's a soft target, and if Dorian wants to play the hero, she'll come running." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, but Malin didn't look convinced. "You sure about this, Vic?" "If it backfires, it won't," Victor cut him off, his voice sharp. "This is how we remind people who we are. If anyone tries to stand in our way, they'll regret it." The following morning, Dorian woke early, her mind already racing. She had spent most of the night devising a plan, one that would protect Astria and send a clear message to the Hollow Reapers without escalating the situation into outright violence. As much as she wanted to confront Victor and end this once and for all, she knew that any misstep could put innocent people at risk. She met Astria at a small cafe near campus, choosing a booth in the back corner where they could talk privately. Astria looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes and her hands trembling as she sipped her coffee. "They're not going to stop, are they?" Astria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Dorian admitted, her tone steady. "But that doesn't mean we're helpless. I've been thinking about how we can turn this around." Astria blinked, her expression a mix of confusion and hope. "What do you mean?" "We need to take control of the narrative," Dorian explained. "Right now they're using fear to keep people silent, but if we expose them, show the campus and the authorities exactly what they're doing, they'll lose that power." Astria frowned. "Expose them how?" "They're careful. They don't leave evidence." "Not yet," Dorian said, "but they're planning something big. I can feel it. When they make their move, we'll be ready." Astria looked doubtful but nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay close to me," Dorian said firmly. "I don't want you alone, not even for a minute. And if anything feels off, anything at all, you call me immediately." Later that afternoon, as Dorian walked Astria back to her dorm, she noticed a group of students gathered near the student union. The atmosphere was charged, voices overlapping as someone held up a phone, pointing at a message displayed on the screen. "Did you see this?" a student asked, his tone laced with unease. "They're threatening her." Dorian pushed through the crowd, her eyes narrowing as she read the screen. It was an anonymous post on a campus forum, the message simple but chilling: "Some lessons are learned the hard way. TikTok, Marine." She clenched her fists, her mind racing. The message wasn't subtle. Victor wanted her to know he was watching, that he was planning something, but what he didn't realize was that she was watching him too. That evening, Dorian put her plan into motion. She called Keir Lowen, who was more than eager to help after realizing the gravity of the situation. Together, they set up a series of hidden cameras around key areas of the campus, focusing on the places Victor and his crew were most likely to target. Keir also agreed to keep his livestream audience informed, using his platform to subtly spread awareness about the Hollow Reapers' activities. "This better work," Keir said as he adjusted one of the cameras. "I don't want to end up on their hit list." "It will," Dorian assured him. "Just make sure you stay out of their way." By midnight, everything was in place. Dorian returned to her dorm, her body exhausted but her mind sharp. She sat on her bed, double-checking the camera feeds on her laptop and waiting for the inevitable. She didn't have to wait long. In the early hours of the morning, her phone buzzed with an alert. One of the cameras had detected movement near the library. Dorian's heart quickened as she saw the grainy footage of Victor and his crew, their shadows long and menacing under the streetlights. They were making their move. Dorian's pulse quickened as she studied the live feed on her laptop. The grainy footage from the library showed Victor Hollow leading his crew across the courtyard. Their movements were deliberate, their expressions set with grim determination. They were carrying something. Chains, perhaps, or lengths of pipe, and Dorian knew this wasn't a scare tactic. This was meant to send a message, one written in destruction and fear. Without hesitation, she grabbed her jacket and slipped out of her dorm. She had already memorized the quickest path to the library, avoiding the main thoroughfares and sticking to the shadows. As she moved, she texted Astria, "Stay in your room. Don't open the door for anyone." Her boots barely made a sound on the pavement as she approached the library's rear entrance. The Hollow Reapers hadn't noticed her yet. They were too busy circling the main doors, scoping out the area. Malin Draycott stood near the fountain, his sharp eyes scanning the perimeter. For a moment, Dorian thought he might spot her, but he turned away, muttering something to Victor. She crept closer, her training kicking in as she assessed the situation. There were 5 of them, including Victor. Each man seemed tense, their usual cocky swagger replaced by a kind of nervous energy. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't their typical brand of intimidation. Dorian pulled back into the shadows and typed a quick message to Keir Lowen. "They're at the library. Stay hidden, but keep your feed running. We need everything recorded." She slipped her phone into her pocket and took a deep breath. She had handled worse situations in the Marines, but this was different. Here, she couldn't rely on her squad or superior firepower. It was just her instincts and years of training, and she couldn't afford to fail, not when Astria's safety was on the line. From her vantage point, Dorian heard Victor bark an order. "Draycott, take the side entrance. Make sure no one's inside." Malin nodded and broke off from the group, heading toward the side door. The remaining bikers began unpacking something from a canvas bag. A spray can, perhaps, and what looked like crude firecrackers. Dorian's stomach turned. They were planning to vandalize the library, maybe even set it on fire. She couldn't wait any longer. Staying hidden wouldn't stop them. Dorian stepped out of the shadows, her voice cutting through the still night air. "You've made your point, Victor. Time to pack it up and leave." The Hollow Reapers froze, their heads snapping toward her. Victor's lips twisted into a sneer, but she saw the flash of surprise in his eyes. "Well, look who decided to join the party," he drawled. "The Marine herself. You've got guts showing up here alone." "I'm not here for guts," Dorian replied coolly. "I'm here to make sure you don't do something you'll regret." Victor laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Regret? You think I regret standing up for my crew? You think I regret showing this campus who's in charge?" He gestured to his men, who were now fanning out around Dorian, forming a loose circle. "You don't scare us, Highfield. Not anymore." Dorian's gaze swept over the group, noting their positions and stances. "You should be scared," she said, her voice steady. "Because if you take one more step toward that library, I'll make sure this is the last time you try to pull something like this." Victor's smirk faltered, but he masked it with bravado. "You talk a big game, Marine. Let's see if you can back it up." He nodded to one of his men, who lunged at Dorian with a length of chain. She sidestepped easily, grabbing his wrist and twisting it sharply. The chain clattered to the ground as the man cried out in pain. Dorian released him and stepped back, her stance calm but ready. "Anyone else?" she asked, her tone almost bored. Victor growled, his hands balling into fists. "You're going to regret this." Dorian didn't reply. She knew better than to waste energy on words. Instead, she shifted her weight, preparing for the next attack. The air between Dorian and the Hollow Reapers was taut with tension, each side waiting for the other to make a move. Victor Hollow's sneer deepened, and he snapped his fingers, signaling 2 of his men to advance. They moved in tandem, one circling to Dorian's left, while the other approached head-on, their confidence bolstered by their numbers. Dorian's eyes flicked between them, assessing their angles of attack. The man in front lunged first, swinging a length of pipe in a wide arc. It was an obvious sloppy move, and Dorian ducked smoothly, stepping inside his reach. Her knee shot up into his midsection, and he doubled over with a grunt, dropping the pipe. She followed with a swift elbow to his back, sending him sprawling onto the pavement. The second man seized the opportunity, charging at her from the side. Dorian turned just in time, her arms coming up to deflect his punch. His momentum carried him too far forward, and she used it against him, gripping his arm and twisting him off balance. A quick kick to the back of his knee brought him to the ground, where he stayed, clutching his leg and cursing. The crowd of bikers hesitated, their bravado visibly shaken. Dorian stood her ground, her breathing steady, her posture unyielding. "This doesn't have to get worse," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge. "Walk away now and no one else gets hurt." Victor laughed, though the sound lacked conviction. "You're making a big mistake, Highfield. We're not some scared little college kids you can boss around." "You sure about that?" Dorian asked, arching an eyebrow. She gestured to the two men groaning on the ground. "Because it doesn't look like you're doing too well." Victor's face darkened and he motioned for Malin Draycott to step forward. Malin, taller and more muscular than the others, approached with measured steps, a heavy chain wrapped around his fist. He didn't rush like the others had, and Dorian recognized the calculated glint in his eyes. He was different, more disciplined, more dangerous. The two circled each other slowly, neither making the first move. Dorian's heart pounded in her chest, but her breathing remained steady. She focused on Malin's movements, watching for any sign of weakness or hesitation. When he struck, it was fast, a sweeping blow aimed at her midsection. She sidestepped, but he recovered quickly, bringing the chain around in a tight arc. Dorian ducked, the chain whistling past her ear, and pivoted on her heel. She struck out with a low kick, aiming for Malin's shin, but he shifted his weight and absorbed the blow, barely flinching. He countered with a quick jab, forcing Dorian to backpedal. The exchange continued, each move and counter-move, testing the other's skill and resolve. Malin's strikes were powerful, but Dorian was faster, her movements precise and efficient. She waited for an opening, biding her time until Malin overextended on a particularly aggressive swing. In that instant, she stepped inside his reach, her hand snapping up to catch his wrist. With a sharp twist, she disarmed him, the chain falling to the ground with a metallic clink. Before Malin could recover, Dorian delivered a precise palm strike to his chest, sending him stumbling backward. He hit the ground hard, gasping for air, but otherwise unharmed. Dorian stepped back, her gaze sweeping over the remaining bikers. "This is over," she said firmly. "Get out of here." Victor's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "You think this is over?" he snarled, taking a step forward. "This is just getting started." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife, the blade catching the light as he brandished it. The remaining bikers looked uneasy, but none moved to stop him. Victor's focus was entirely on Dorian, his expression twisted with rage and frustration. "You've pushed me too far, Highfield." Dorian didn't flinch. Her stance shifted slightly, her weight balanced and ready. "You don't want to do this, Victor," she said evenly. "Put the knife down before you make things worse for yourself." Victor's grip tightened on the hilt, his knuckles white. He lunged at her with a furious yell, the blade slashing through the air. Dorian sidestepped gracefully, her hand snapping out to grab his wrist. She twisted sharply, forcing him to drop the knife, which clattered to the ground. Victor let out a cry of pain, but Dorian didn't relent. She pivoted behind him, pinning his arm against his back and forcing him to his knees. The fight drained out of Victor as quickly as it had come. He slumped forward, breathing heavily, his defiance replaced with a dull resignation. Dorian released him, stepping back to maintain her distance. "Stay down," she ordered. For a moment, no one moved. The other bikers exchanged uncertain glances, their confidence thoroughly shattered. Finally, one of them muttered, "Come on, Vic, let's go." Victor didn't respond immediately, his shoulders heaving as he struggled to regain his composure. When he finally rose to his feet, it was with a reluctant nod. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this." "We'll see," Dorian replied, her tone cool and unwavering. The Hollow Reapers retreated, their bikes roaring to life as they sped away into the night. Dorian stood in the empty courtyard, her heart still racing but her resolve unshaken. She knew Victor's threat wasn't idle, but for now, the immediate danger had passed. The sound of the bikers' engines faded into the distance, leaving the campus eerily silent. Dorian Highfield remained where she was, her eyes scanning the courtyard one last time to ensure no one lingered in the shadows. Her hands ached from the confrontation, and her breath came in slow, measured exhales as she worked to steady her racing heart. Despite her outward composure, adrenaline still surged through her veins. She reached down and picked up Victor's discarded knife, turning it over in her hand. The blade was sharp but unremarkable, a tool meant to intimidate more than inflict serious harm. Dorian frowned, her thoughts turning to Victor's escalating recklessness. The bikers had pushed boundaries tonight, and she doubted this would be their last attempt. Still, she had bought herself time and hopefully discouraged them enough to rethink their next move. Dorian slipped the knife into her jacket pocket and turned toward the library. She needed to check on the cameras Keir Lowen had installed. If everything had worked as planned, they would have captured the entire encounter, providing evidence she could present to the authorities. Her footsteps echoed softly on the pavement as she approached the main entrance, where Keir was crouched behind a stone planter, his phone clutched tightly in his hands. "Is it over?" Keir whispered, his wide eyes peeking over the edge of the planter. Dorian nodded, gesturing for him to stand. "They're gone, for now. Did you get everything?" Keir held up his phone, a live stream still running on the screen. The chat feed was filled with messages. That was insane. She took them all down. Dorian is a legend. The view count had skyrocketed during the confrontation, and the video was already being shared across multiple platforms. "Yeah, I got it," Keir said, his voice trembling slightly. "You're trending again, by the way." Dorian grimaced. She had never wanted this kind of attention, but if it meant exposing the Hollow Reapers, she was willing to tolerate the spotlight a little longer. "Good," she said. "Keep that footage safe. We're going to need it." Keir nodded, tucking his phone into his pocket. "What now? Now we report this," Dorian said firmly. "No more waiting around for them to strike first. It's time to put an end to this." Half an hour later, Dorian and Keir were sitting in the campus security office. Officer Gideon Ashvale listened intently as Dorian recounted the night's events, his pen scratching across a notepad. The dimly lit room smelled faintly of stale coffee, and the faint hum of a desk fan provided a steady background noise. "This is serious," Gideon said, leaning back in his chair. "If what you're saying is true, and with the video to back it up, the Reapers are crossing a line. We can't let this slide." Dorian crossed her arms, her gaze steady. "They crossed the line days ago. This isn't just intimidation anymore. They're targeting students, threatening lives. We need a coordinated response." Gideon nodded slowly. "I'll file this report tonight and forward it to the police. With the evidence you've provided, they'll have enough to open an investigation, but it might take time before we see any real action." "Time isn't something we have," Dorian said sharply. "Victor won't stop until he feels like he's regained control. We need to be proactive." Gideon sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'll do what I can, but you need to be careful, Dorian. These guys aren't just troublemakers, they're dangerous." "I know," Dorian said. "That's why we can't let them win." As Dorian left the security office, she felt a wave of exhaustion crash over her. The night's events had taken a toll, both physically and mentally, but there was still work to be done. She pulled out her phone and texted Astria. "It's safe for now. I'll update you in the morning." Astria's reply came almost instantly. "Thank you, Dorian. I don't know what I'd do without you." Dorian allowed herself a small smile before heading back to her dorm. The campus was quiet now, the tension of earlier replaced by an uneasy calm. She knew this was only the beginning. Victor's parting words echoed in her mind like a lingering threat. But for the first time, she felt like she had the upper hand. Victor Hollow stormed into the garage that served as the Hollow Reaper's unofficial base, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the tools hanging on the walls. His crew trailed behind him in silence, their usual bravado replaced by unease. Malin Dracott rubbed his shoulder where Dorian's strike had left a lingering ache, his jaw set in frustration. The others avoided Victor's glare, none of them eager to be the first to speak. Victor paced furiously, his boots striking the concrete floor in a relentless rhythm. His face was flushed and his fists clenched and unclenched as he replayed the night's events in his mind. "She humiliated us," he growled, his voice low but charged with fury. Again. "Vic, we were outmatched," Malin said cautiously. "She's not just some college kid, she's a problem," Victor snapped, cutting him off. He slammed his fist onto the workbench, sending a wrench skittering across the surface. "And problems need to be dealt with." The room fell silent. The tension was palpable, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken doubts. Finally, one of the younger bikers hesitated before speaking. "What about the video? It's all over campus. People are calling her a hero." Victor turned on him, his eyes blazing. "I don't care about the video," he snarled. "This isn't about what they think, it's about control, and right now she's the only thing standing between us and this campus." Malin shifted uncomfortably. "Vic, maybe it's time to back off." "This isn't worth it. She's got everyone watching now, the students, the security, even the cops. We push any harder, and we're the ones who'll end up behind bars." Victor's gaze hardened, and for a moment it seemed like he might lash out. But then he straightened, his expression icy. "If you're scared, Malin, no one's stopping you from walking out that door." Malin met his eyes for a long moment before shaking his head. "I'm just saying we need to think this through." Victor didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to the workbench, his mind already working on a new plan. Meanwhile, Dorian sat at her desk, reviewing the footage Keir Lowen had sent her from the cameras around the library. Every angle captured the bikers' actions clearly: their arrival, their attempt to intimidate, and finally, their retreat. It was more than enough to build a strong case against them, but Dorian knew better than to rely solely on bureaucracy. Victor wouldn't stop until he felt like he had won, or until he was forced to realize that continuing the fight would cost him more than he could bear. Her phone buzzed with a message from Gideon Ashvale, filed the report. "Cops are reviewing the video. Keep your guard up." She typed a quick reply. "Thanks. Let me know if you hear anything." The plan forming in her mind was risky, but it was the best chance she had to end this once and for all. She needed to confront Victor directly, not with fists or threats, but with an undeniable truth. The more he pushed, the more he would lose. Dorian wasn't afraid of him, and she would make sure he understood that fear was no longer a weapon he could wield against anyone. The next evening, Victor received an unexpected text. The message was simple: "Meet me at the old bridge at midnight. No backup, just you and me." Victor stared at the screen, his lips curling into a sneer. It didn't take a genius to figure out who had sent it. "She wants a showdown," he muttered, tossing his phone onto the table. "Fine, I'll give her one." When midnight arrived, Dorian was already waiting at the bridge. The structure, once a bustling thoroughfare, had long since fallen into disrepair. Its steel beams rusted and its surface cracked with age. The only light came from the moon overhead, casting long shadows across the empty expanse. Victor's motorcycle roared to a stop a few feet away, and he dismounted with deliberate slowness. He didn't bother hiding the knife tucked into his belt this time, letting it glint in the pale light as he approached. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, his voice carrying easily in the still night air. "But guts only get you so far." "I didn't come here to fight," Dorian said, her tone calm but firm. "I came to talk." Victor's laughter was sharp and hollow. "Talk? After everything that's happened? You think I want to sit down and chat?" "You should," Dorian replied, "because if you don't, you're going to lose everything." Victor's expression darkened, but he didn't interrupt. Dorian took a step closer, her stance relaxed but unyielding. You think this is about power, about control, but every time you try to prove yourself, you make more enemies. The students, the authorities, even your own crew, they're starting to question you, Victor. They're not blind." Victor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "You want to keep pushing?" Dorian continued. "Go ahead. I'll be right there to stop you every time. And I'm not the only one. The more you escalate, the more people will stand against you. You can't win this." For a moment, Victor's mask of bravado slipped, revealing the frustration and uncertainty beneath, but he quickly recovered, his sneer returning. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? Some kind of savior." "I'm just someone who doesn't let bullies win," Dorian said simply. "The choice is yours, Victor. Walk away now, or keep fighting and watch everything fall apart." The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Finally, Victor let out a bitter laugh and shook his head. "You're something else, Highfield. I'll give you that." He turned and walked back to his motorcycle, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't say another word as he mounted the bike and roared off into the night, leaving Dorian standing alone on the bridge. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing as the tension ebbed away. It wasn't the definitive victory she had hoped for, but it was enough, for now. The morning after the confrontation at the old bridge, the campus was abuzz with whispers and speculation. Although no one had witnessed the midnight meeting between Dorian and Victor, the absence of the Hollow Reapers that day spoke volumes. Their motorcycles were nowhere to be seen, and the usual sense of intimidation that had lingered around the campus for weeks was conspicuously absent. Dorian sat quietly in the corner of the campus cafe, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. She watched as students moved about, their conversations returning to mundane topics of exams, weekend plans, and upcoming events. For the first time in weeks, there was no fear in the air, no hushed tones about who might be the biker's next target. Across from her, Astria Windvale sat with a notebook open, jotting down notes for an essay. Despite the usual calm of her studious demeanor, there was a newfound brightness in her eyes. She had been able to walk across campus that morning without the familiar weight of dread pressing down on her. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Astria said, glancing up from her notebook. Dorian nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. "It does, but don't let your guard down just yet." Astria frowned. "Do you think they'll come back?" "They might," Dorian admitted, "but I don't think Victor will push this any further, not after last night." Astria's brow furrowed. "What did you say to him?" "I just gave him a choice," Dorian said simply, "and made sure he understood the consequences." Astria smiled faintly. "You make it sound so easy." "It wasn't," Dorian replied, her tone serious, "but it was necessary." Meanwhile, at the old garage where the Hollow Reapers often gathered, Victor sat alone, his hands resting on the handlebars of his motorcycle. His crew had scattered after the previous night, some muttering about needing time to think, others outright questioning his leadership. Malin Dracott had been the bluntest, pointing out that Victor's obsession with proving himself had only brought them trouble. Victor clenched his jaw, his mind replaying Dorian's words. She had seen straight through him, cutting past the bravado and bravely challenging the foundation of his power. It wasn't about the fights or the standoffs, it was about control, and he had lost it, not just over the campus, but over his crew and himself. A low rumble of an engine drew his attention, and Malin pulled up on his bike, parking a few feet away. He dismounted and walked over, his expression unreadable. "Vic," Malin began, his tone cautious, "you've been quiet since last night." Victor didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "What's there to say?" he muttered. "She was right. I pushed too hard." Malin studied him for a moment before nodding. "So, what now?" Victor sighed heavily. "We pull back. Stay out of sight for a while. Let things cool down." Malin's lips quirked in a faint smile. "You're finally listening to reason. Don't push it," Victor said, but there was no malice in his tone. For the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of his decisions and the realization that he needed to change. That evening, Dorian attended a meeting with Officer Gideon Ashvale and a representative from the local police department. The evidence from the library cameras and Keir's live stream had been reviewed, and while there wasn't enough to press serious charges against the Hollow Reapers, the authorities were clear any further infractions would result in immediate consequences. "We'll increase patrols around campus," the police officer assured her. "If they show their faces again, we'll be ready." Dorian nodded, though she knew the bikers wouldn't be so quick to return. Victor's retreat wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. He had been forced to confront his limits, and for someone like him, that was a defeat more cutting than any physical blow. As she left the meeting, Keir Lowen caught up with her, his phone in hand as always. "Hey Dorian," he said, falling into step beside her. "You're officially a campus legend now. The video's hit 100,000 views." Dorian rolled her eyes, though there was a faint smile on her lips. "That's the last thing I wanted." "Yeah, but it's what people needed," Keir said, his voice earnest. "You stood up when no one else could. You gave them hope." "I just did what anyone should," Dorian replied. "Maybe," Keir said, "but not everyone does." The days that followed were surprisingly quiet. The campus returned to its normal rhythm, and the Hollow Reapers faded into the background, their presence all but forgotten. But for those who had been directly affected, Astria, Keir, and even Dorian, the events of the past weeks left an indelible mark. Astria began attending self-defense classes, determined to reclaim her sense of security. Keir continued to use his platform to advocate for campus safety, his once casual approach to social media now driven by a deeper purpose. And Dorian, though she avoided the spotlight as much as possible, found herself drawn into conversations with students who had seen her as a symbol of resilience and strength. One afternoon, Astria approached Dorian outside the library, a determined look in her eyes. "I've been thinking," she began, "what if we started a support group for students who've been through stuff like this?" Dorian considered the idea, a small smile playing on her lips. "That's a good idea, Astria. I think a lot of people could use that." "You'd help me set it up, right?" Astria asked. "Of course," Dorian said. "Whatever you need." As Astria beamed with excitement, Dorian felt a quiet sense of pride. She had stepped into the fight to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, and in doing so, she had inspired others to find their own strength. Dorian Highfield stood in the center of the gymnasium, the echoes of voices and laughter filling the vast space. Around her, students practiced punches and defensive stances under the guidance of trained instructors. The self-defense workshop, organized by Astria Windvale and supported by Dorian, had drawn an unexpectedly large crowd. Word had spread quickly across campus, and the event had turned into a symbol of resilience and empowerment. Astria was at the front of one group, demonstrating a simple wrist escape technique with surprising confidence. Her voice carried over the chatter as she encouraged the participants to try the move for themselves. Dorian couldn't help but smile as she watched. Just weeks ago, Astria had been too timid to even walk across campus alone. Now she was stepping into a leadership role, her fear replaced by determination. Keir Lowen wandered through the crowd, his phone in hand as he captured footage of the event. "This is incredible," he said, sidling up to Dorian. "We've got over 200 people here, and the live stream is blowing up. People love what you've started." "I didn't start this," Dorian corrected him. "Astria did. She's the one who turned this into something bigger." Keir smirked. "Yeah, but she wouldn't have done it without you. You gave her the courage to stand up in the first place." Dorian shrugged, her gaze returning to the students practicing around her. She had it in her all along. She just needed someone to remind her. As the event wound down, Dorian found herself sitting on the edge of the gym stage, watching the last few participants file out. Astria joined her, a water bottle in hand and a wide grin on her face. "I can't believe how many people showed up," Astria said, her excitement palpable. "And they actually want to do this again. Can you imagine? We could make this a regular thing." "I think you should," Dorian said. "The more people who know how to defend themselves, the better." Astria hesitated, her smile faltering slightly. "Dorian, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Dorian replied. "Why did you get involved?" Astria asked. "I mean, you didn't have to. You could have ignored what was happening and stayed out of it. Why didn't you?" Dorian thought for a moment, her gaze distant. "When I was in the Marines, I saw a lot of people who didn't have anyone to stand up for them. It's a terrible feeling, being powerless, knowing no one's coming to help. I couldn't just let that happen here, not when I could do something about it." Astria nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "You're a good person, Dorian, even if you don't like to admit it." Dorian chuckled softly. "I just do what I think is right." Later that evening, as Dorian walked back to her dorm, she felt a rare sense of peace. The campus seemed brighter somehow. The oppressive tension that had hung over it for weeks now lifted. She passed by small groups of students chatting and laughing, their faces free of the worry that had once been so pervasive. At her dorm, a stack of mail waited on the table. Among the usual flyers and notices, there was a letter addressed to her in an unfamiliar handwriting. She opened it carefully, her brow furrowing as she read. "Dorian, you were right. I've been thinking about what you said, and I'm done fighting battles that don't matter. I need to figure out who I am without all the noise. Thanks for making me see that." Victor Dorian stared at the letter for a long moment, a mixture of surprise and satisfaction washing over her. She hadn't expected Victor to reach out, let alone acknowledge the truth of their confrontation. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was a step in the right direction, a sign that even the most stubborn adversaries could change. She tucked the letter into her desk drawer, feeling a quiet sense of closure. Victor's words weren't just an ending, they were a reminder that every action, every choice, had the potential to ripple outward, touching lives in ways she might never fully understand. In the weeks that followed, the campus continued to heal. The self-defense workshops became a regular event, attracting not just students but faculty and staff as well. Astria took the lead, her confidence growing with each session. Keir used his platform to promote the workshops, turning his once casual social media presence into a tool for advocacy and community building. Dorian, though reluctant to step into the spotlight, found herself becoming a quiet pillar of support. Students sought her out for advice, not just about safety but about life. Her past, once a burden she had tried to leave behind, had become a source of strength, not just for herself, but for others. One afternoon, as she walked through the quad, she passed by a group of students practicing self-defense techniques. They waved to her, their faces bright with gratitude and respect. Dorian waved back, her heart swelling with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She realized then that her journey wasn't just about protecting others. It was about rediscovering herself, her values, her strength, and her place in the world. And in doing so, she had helped create something far greater than herself, a community built on resilience, courage, and the belief that no one should ever have to face their battles alone. Dorian Highfield's story isn't just about standing up to intimidation. It's about finding the strength to protect not only yourself, but also the people around you. It's a reminder that true courage doesn't come from size or power. It comes from the heart and the willingness to fight for what's right. Here at Heart Tales, we celebrate stories like this, stories that inspire us to be brave, compassionate, and resilient in the face of life's challenges. Now it's your turn. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to summon courage or stand up for someone else? Or maybe this story made you think of someone in your life who embodies that kind of strength. We'd love to hear your thoughts. drop them in the comments below and share how this story touched your heart. Thank you for riding with us today on Veteran Biker. If this story moved you, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs a reminder of what real strength looks like, and hit that subscribe button to join our growing family of warriors, patriots, and everyday heroes. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're the first to catch our next story, a powerful act of kindness that transformed an entire neighborhood.